It's a big review, so buckle up. This headphone was sent out by Hifiman, but this video is actually sponsored by headphones.com, where you can buy this if you choose to, as well as anything else I talk about in today's video. They sell everything from the ultra high-end stuff to the really budget-friendly stuff like the Edition XS, which you can also find the links down below too. If you have any questions, they have great customer service. They do have payment options if you are looking at something like this, and a great online selection of a bunch of different hi-fi equipment. If you're looking into something like this, they are a truly high-quality online retailer that I would look into. Thanks a lot, Headphones, for sponsoring today's video. Now, you know the drill. Even though they're sponsoring, all thoughts and opinions, like always, are going to be my own here, and I have a lot of thoughts and opinions about this thing. Now, if you're curious about the benefits and drawbacks of the whole Unveiled thing or the covers, I did a whole dedicated video covering this, no pun intended, and it's linked down below. You can check that out. But I did see some concerning comments that I wanted to address right away. This is not a headphone that is like a hybrid. You can't use it open and closed with the cups. This is purely a cover for when you're not using it. It's not meant to be used as an open back and closed back headphone, only an open back. Now, I have a bit of a hot take on this headphone, and to understand that hot take, you have to understand how much this headphone costs if you've not caught the price yet. It's $8,000, which is one of, if not the highest single headphone price I think I've seen. That's not like part of a bigger system. And that makes this extraordinarily expensive. But my hot take is that I don't actually think that Hifiman wants to sell you this headphone. I think the headphones they want to sell you are headphones like this, the HE1000 Unveiled, which comparatively seems like a really good deal. Headphones like the Aria Unveiled, even lower headphones like the Susvara, I think benefit from the advertisement of something with a price tag like this. This is sort of like the classic trickle-down effect is what it's known as. A classic example would be like Formula One with Ferrari, and then all of a sudden you think that because you're buying the streetcar version that you're getting a fraction of that. And in this case, as we'll talk about later in this video, I think that that is actually true in terms of sound quality. I think that there's a lot of crossover and even some gain for going with a lower end Hifiman. So I think that they will sell this to you, of course, but I think that their intention is not to sell a bunch of Susvara Unveileds, if I'm being honest. In terms of build quality and comfort, this is absolutely easily, actually, my favorite Hifiman in terms of just comfort. It's got slightly bigger pads on the inside than Susvara, but not quite as big as headphones like the HE1K with those bigger ear-shaped pads. And being a relatively slim planar design that doesn't weigh that much, the weight distribution of this is actually incredible, and I find this to be very comfortable. And actually not even just one of the most comfortable Hifimans, but I find this to just be one of the most comfortable headphones, period. The build quality I don't think is gonna wow for the $8,000 asking price, but I do think it is one of the best built Hifimans that do currently exist. That being said, they're not quite as nice as some other brands like Abyss, if you're into more of a metal build. And if you're into more of a hand-built feel, I think ZMF wins against this. Now, efficiency has always been a problem with Susvara, and I think in today's market, with amps being as good as they are, as powerful as they are, and as good sounding as they are, the barrier to entry for powering a headphone like this has gotten less and less over the years. When the OG came out, it was a different story, but I think nowadays you can get really, really good sound out of a less than $1,000 amp and DAC system like the AUN S9C, which I've been using for a lot of this review and think is perfectly adequate. Now, when it comes to sound quality, this thing is absolutely confusing. On one hand, it's the best Hifiman. On the other hand, it's not the best Hifiman. This happens again and again in every region of the entire frequency response, all of the tuning. And I've talked to some other reviewers about this, and the reaction seems to be one of two things. Either it's good, but not worth the asking price, or it's sometimes good, sometimes bad, and sometimes great. And I think that both of these things are true. Let's start with the graph to treble response. It's a little bit on the top end of a preference curve on this frequency response graph that was measured on a different Susvara Unveiled, but you can see it's a little bit on the brighter end while not totally exceeding like some of the other Hifimans that are out there. In fact, one of my favorite Hifimans currently is the HE1000 Unveiled, and that's actually a brighter frequency response in the treble area. Now, what's interesting about this is that this actually doesn't come across super screechy or harsh to my ear, at least. I find this to be a pretty resolving headphone without being too sharp or too overly saturated for treble, which is nice to see in terms of Hifiman's current lineup. A lot of their headphones from their Aria to their HE1000 and their Anandas are, in my opinion, a little bit too bright. Now, those come with benefits and drawbacks of their own, as we'll discuss in a little bit. But for now, this is actually one of the better tuned Hifiman headphones in the top end. It's one of the most controlled. Now, when you compare that to the slightly brighter HE1000, the HE1000 actually, to my ear, in the treble response, whether it's a frequency tuning or not, it actually seems a little bit faster to me. It seems a little bit more detailed for the HE1000 Unveiled. And that was a little surprising to me because you would feel like the Susvara, being the flagship, would be the most detailed, but I don't actually find that to be the case. Now, maybe it's something where the driver is actually a little bit faster on the Susvara, but because the tuning is a little bit sharper and a little bit brighter on the 1000, it comes across a little bit more detailed, even though it's not technically more detailed. Even if that's the case, I find the access to detail easier on the HE1000, even though audibly it is definitely sharper sounding in an unpleasant way. It's slightly brighter than the Susvara. The Susvara is smoother. Now, the Susvara seems to hit fairly neutral for me in this area because it doesn't actually exceed what I would consider like my brightness cap to be, where I think things are bright. It's kind of just under there, but it also isn't a dark headphone either. But it's right in the middle for me where it doesn't feel overly sharpened or overly dull. Now, mid-range, I'm kind of a love it and hate it type of guy here, because in some songs, it's really, really excellent. And in fact, the lower mid-range, as you can see on the graph, does fill out pretty well, and this can sound pretty full in a way that some other Hifimans sound a little thin in. Like if you go back to the OG Aria, that headphone sounds really thin in the lower mid-range compared to this. This is much fuller and thicker and more consistent and, in my opinion, more neutral, but in some ways a little bit less exciting than some other headphones. So it does come across quite full. Not quite to the level of being like a warm sounding headphone, but very full for sure. And then there is the bass. And the bass to me is just confusing. Hifiman seems to have this obsession with like this flat line for bass, where they don't do much enhancement for sub bass or even mid bass really. On one hand, I can kind of see what they're going for because it comes across really clean. It comes across very, kind of neutral, but ultimately unexciting. And when you listen to a headphone that has a bit of a bass boost there, that has a little bit stronger sub bass, you really see the advantages come forward a lot more. So on the HE1000, which to my ear has a more elevated bass response, that headphone just comes across more exciting and more dynamic for more music than that of the Susvara, which seems a little bit tamed, I suppose, in the bass. And I just wish they would embrace just a little bit more bass, especially for their top-end headphones, because when you compare them to other top-end headphones, especially for bass, they don't really compete. When it comes to bass speed, I feel like Abyss is able to do that a little bit better. And when it comes to bass quantity, ZMF, Empyrean, quite a few other brands are able to do a higher amount of quantity while having basically equivalent bass speed. So if you're into a cleaner, more kind of balanced sound signature, I think that this does a good job of maintaining what it seems like they're going for here. But I think some people, especially when you're spending this much, are looking for extremes of certain categories. So they want the best of something. And for these three frequency areas, treble, mids, and bass, I don't feel like it's giving me exceedingly great performance in any category. However, the synchronicity does seem to work together for certain music really, really well. And this is perhaps the most conflicting part of this headphone for me personally. On some songs, this headphone is like the best version of that song I've ever heard. I've heard a lot of equipment on all my test tracks, and this is better on some songs than everything else I've heard. And this is an experience that some other reviewers have mentioned as well in their own reviews. And it's definitely something that I feel as well. An area that makes this really clear is how this does sound staging. So the aggregate, like average sound staging performance is better on the HE1000. It's a little bit wider. It's more dynamic between the mid-range kind of fullness for the voice and the background separation and instruments for the top end. Like it's got this more dynamic ability to soundstage wider on more songs than that of the Susvara. However, if you play the right track, the Susvara like will do like this disappearing act that is like just uncanny. It's almost unnerving sometimes how you will go from song to song and songs sound fine, they sound good, and then you'll hit one track that like the headphone just disappears. It's really weird. It's very cool when it happens, but it's not super consistent. But that disappearing act is more impressive than the HE1000 in some circumstances, because the HE1000, while being very good, I'm always aware of it. It never quite does the disappearing act fully. And neither does a headphone like the Empyrean 2, which in some cases is more extreme and better for like bass or sound staging, for example, technically, but may not do the disappearing act as well as often as this does. So if I'm being honest, I'm left really conflicted about this headphone. And I think that leads me into my conclusion for this thing. If the price wasn't obvious enough, this is for a very high-end customer. What I mean by that is somebody who this is not their only headphone. In fact, the way that I would personally use this headphone and would recommend using this headphone is you have a broad system of headphones already, and you want this specific headphone for specific either albums or songs, and you're just gonna pull it out for those and use other things for the rest. I'm not saying this to justify its price tag or its performance at all, but I am saying that I can see the usability here if this is part of a broader system. But I probably wouldn't invest this much cash into this specific headphone at this price, considering that I could buy the HE1000, the Empyrean 2, a Bokeh, a really good amplifier, and still cost less than all this. I would, it's hard to not do that route versus just buying one of these. But I think it's also worth saying that I'm not really the target market for this. This is well above the price that I would pay for headphones. And so it's hard for me to put myself in that perspective, but I can definitely see the utilization as part of a lineup of headphones that use certain headphones for certain genres and certain songs. Now, if you're curious about more direct comparisons, I'm actually gonna have a Susvara versus everything video, and I'll be comparing against every headphone that I can compare against in that video, and that will come out in a couple days, so get subscribed for that. Now, for headphone veterans, this conclusion is not all that surprising because these ultra high-end headphones, everybody knows, they're not the best at everything. No headphone is. This is just really, really good at certain songs. And when a headphone costs as much as this does, arguing over value isn't really the point because no one purchasing this is really looking for a value purchase in the first place. This is for real, genuine, ultra high-end customers who don't really think about the price, simply put. If you're one of those, I would recommend using our sponsor down below, headphones.com. You can pick this up if you choose to. For me personally, just like my genuine personal recommendation, the trickle-down effect here is real. And I think that not just for a value perspective, but even if these are the same cost, I still think that I would pick the HE1000 Unveiled personally over this. It's just a bit more impressive for the things that I look for. It's a bit less neutral and it's a bit less comfortable, but for me, it just tailors to me a little bit better. All right, thanks Headphones for sponsoring this video. Check them out, guys. Whether it's this or really, really budget-friendly headphones like the Edition XS, like I mentioned, that is a great headphone to buy. I'll link that down below as well. It's, hold on, I just did the math. And you can buy 28 Edition XSs for the same price as one Susvara. So, you know, that's pretty cool. All right, thanks a lot. See you guys in the next video. Peace.